One of the real challenges in defining digital is that it means different things to different people, which is why exploring those differences and building a common understanding is a really important starting point for executives. A technology perspective might be that digital represents the virtualisation of previously physical products and services. Music is a good example. Years ago, a collection of songs was always associated with a physical album. Nowadays, a collection of songs is usually purely digital. But there are many other perspectives too. For example, the marketing perspective might be that digital is a new way to reach and identify customers. To corporate IT, digital might represent a platform for better collaboration and improved business processes. To manufacturing, it could be about automating the supply chain and making the most of the Internet of Things. Digital can also mean a whole new business model, for example, as the iTunes Store became for the music industry. Our definition of digital is to focus on what it does and what it lets businesses achieve, not what it is. So we're working with the definition that digital is the use of new technology to do things in business differently. And that difference may be at any scale, within one function of an organisation, such as customer service, across a whole organisation, the way it collaborates, or it could be at the scale of a whole industry or market sector. That's one of the things that makes it so diverse in how people understand it. It's really interesting to contrast how digital shows up between existing organisations and new market entrants. Digital clearly represents an opportunity for existing businesses to do things better, and at the same time it represents an opportunity for new entrants to come into the market and be able to do things differently. Let's take the established industry of legal services, for example, one I'm familiar with. Lawyers create a lot of documents, and this traditionally requires a lot of machinery, a lot of paper and a lot of administration to move those documents around. But the work of lawyers is increasingly becoming digital. And with that is associated a change in mindsets, a change in business processes, a change in the underlying technology. And all of this leads to a faster and more responsive service for their clients. In other cases, digital represents a whole new way of doing business. New businesses can enter and compete on different terms. We've seen some stunningly successful examples of this in recent years, for example in the transport market with Uber and in accommodation with Airbnb. The important thing to remember though is that existing businesses can adapt, and the first challenge for their leaders is to understand the relevant meaning of what digital is in their business context. And that's what we advise our clients. Digital leadership's about establishing at the executive level a clear and common understanding of what digital means and the parts of it that are important for their business. As digital has a wide range of meanings, this isn't trivial and it really requires some careful thought and asking the right questions. So that's why a starting point is to work out what those questions are. The sort of questions that leaders might ask to develop a map of the digital landscape are things like, what will our industry look like in the future? And who are our emerging digital competitors? What will our customers expect in the future? And how will we meet or exceed those expectations? What new ways of working will make the most sense for us? And do we have the right digital talent and skills? And finally, how do we proceed in the face of such enormous uncertainty? Some of the things you can do to dig into these questions are to map out the answers using a framework suitable for open, complex problems, such as design thinking. That's one approach, for example. In today's information-intensive industries, where technology and digital capabilities already play a key role, leadership and digital leadership are likely to be very closely aligned already, if not the same thing. However, for business executives and IT professionals who have spent most of their careers in different paths, this is not necessarily true. It's especially important for these groups to come together to develop a shared understanding of how to create value, and that's what digital leadership is. Digital disruption, at its simplest, is where changes enabled by digital technology disrupt established ways of doing business. The best way that I've come across to really understand the richness of what is meant by digital disruption is from a framework developed by Rachel Botsman. In her framework, she developed 5 key factors that influence the probability with which a market or industry will be disrupted by digital technology. The first is where there is waste. Think empty houses and unused cars. The second factor is where there are complex customer experiences. Think about trying to borrow money from a bank, for example. The third factor is where there are redundant intermediaries. So think taxi billing providers. Fourth factor is where there's limited access. A great example of this is higher education, particularly in developing countries. And the final factor is where there exists broken trust relationships. So think about trying to buy a used car, going and getting some financial planning advice. So digital disruptor businesses find ways to overcome one or more of these factors by turning them into their opposites. For example, waste will become efficiency. Redundant intermediaries become direct interactions between people. Broken trust becomes greater transparency, enabled by something like reputation mechanisms. If you think about all the great disruptive digital businesses, you'll be able to find one or more of those factors explaining the reason for their success. That's why this is a useful framework, I think, because it gets under the surface to identify the common themes and patterns that are occurring across a range of different industries. Digital disruption is happening in many sectors of the economy and society more broadly. I want to focus on 3 areas where I think some really interesting things are happening. Firstly, governments. For governments and policymakers, the big challenge is the sheer pace of change being driven by digital disruption. Some cities are adopting a quicker model of policy development and release, and I think the Australian government needs to adopt a similar approach where digital disruption is concerned, to develop a policy rapidly and release it with some defined time period, for example 2 years. Financial services, that's another area where digital disruption is really having an interesting effect. New entrants are getting regulator approval within a matter of weeks rather than months, and this is driving the development of some of the most innovative business models. The labour market's a third area where digital disruption is having a major impact. Employment is becoming more piecemeal and granular, with what were once jobs now being broken down into contracts. That's a trend that's been underway for some while. Now it's shifting even further to contracts being broken down into tasks. The increased displacement of people by machines is also shifting from manual labour up to professional jobs. We're seeing this in areas like investment reporting, where companies like Automated Insights have created agents, intelligent agents, that can now pretty much replace what journalists once did in that area. So digital disruption really is changing a lot of things in our economy. Digital disruption is real. It's changing. It's changing what governments need to do, it's changing financial services, it's changing the labour market, and they're just a few key areas. Digital disruption clearly does have a potentially huge negative impact for jobs, particularly in the knowledge-intensive industries. But it's not all bad news. The pace of change means that new jobs requiring new skills and capabilities are also being created as a result of digital disruption. For example, there were no web developers, SEO marketers, or user interface designers only 20 years ago. But now most medium to large companies will have some of these types of jobs. This will likely continue. However, the educational bar has been set pretty high, and we see that this will only likely rise in the future. So that's a big challenge for us as a society. New firms are using digital technology to bring about positive change, while at the same time challenging existing players. Let me explain how with a few examples. We'll take Uber. It's been in the media a lot lately, it's very successful. They provide a booking and dynamic pricing system, and they utilise existing cars of private citizens to undercut the taxi industry. They reduce the waste of underutilised assets, the private cars. They attack redundant intermediaries, the cab charge company, for example. It opens up limited access, taxi plates, previously only available to a few. Now anyone can become an Uber driver. And it makes transactions more transparent. So there's a reputation system that goes both ways. I can see how trustworthy a taxi driver is, they can see how trustworthy I would be as a passenger. It's revolutionised that area of transport. In the same way, other firms in other industries are changing their industries. Lending Club and RateSetter are doing this in financial services. Flightcar is changing the way the airport car rental business works, and it's undercutting the car rental business. And a company called giffgaff, which is a telecommunications provider, is changing the way that businesses provide customer service by outsourcing it to the customers and rewarding them accordingly. And in doing that, they're able to undercut the pricing of their competitors while providing a very efficient and effective service. So it's happening in a positive way, and it's challenging existing players. It's something that we all need to be conscious of. Digital is really both an opportunity and a threat at the same time, and we think clients should be examining both these aspects of the digital phenomenon. There are three key things that we think need to be considered. Firstly, developing a clear and shared understanding of what digital means in your business context. How do you do this? That brings me to point 2. Being able to ask and answer a series of questions to map out the internal and external environment to understand the disruption points that digital capabilities have and the implications for your customers. Thirdly, to then communicate your ideas within the organisation to set the frame for understanding and then action. So this is our approach, and this is how we work with our clients to help them become more digital.